Hyun-sik stared at the scanner screen for the third time that morning. The green dots showing normal space traffic blinked steadily across the display. Cargo ships moved between planets. Military patrols flew their regular routes. Everything looked normal in this corner of the Corvin Empire, but something was wrong. He rubbed his tired eyes and looked again. There it was, a single dot that should not be there. It sat perfectly still at the edge of their scanning range, just outside the official border of Corvin space. "So Young," he called to his partner across the monitoring station. "Come look. At this?" So Young pushed back from her communications desk and walked over. Her boots made soft clicking sounds on the metal floor of the space station. The station was small, only big enough for 2 people and their equipment. It floated in orbit around a dead planet, watching for threats to the Empire. "What is it?" she asked, leaning over his shoulder to see the screen. "Unknown contact. Been sitting there for..." Hyun-sik checked the timestamps. 47 days. So Young frowned. 47 days? That's impossible. Why didn't we notice it before? Because it barely shows up on our sensors. Look at this. Hyun-sik switched to a different display. The computer keeps marking it as space debris, but debris doesn't hold a perfect position for 47 days. The object was roughly the size of a Corvin destroyer, but its shape was all wrong. Corvin ships were built like daggers, long and sharp, designed to strike fear into enemies. This thing looked smooth and curved, almost organic. The metal seemed to drink in their scanner beams instead of reflecting them back. "Run a deep scan," So Young said. Hyun-sik typed commands into his console. The station's most powerful sensors focused on the mysterious object. Numbers scrolled across the screen. Energy readings showed nothing. Life signs showed nothing. Weapons signatures showed nothing. "It's completely dark," Hyun-sik said. "No power, no heat, no movement. But it's maintaining a perfect orbit. That's not possible unless it has some kind of propulsion system we can't detect," So Young finished. They looked at each other. In their 5 years of working together on this monitoring station, they had never seen anything like this. The Corvin Empire had conquered 17 star systems. They knew every type of ship that existed in this part of the galaxy. This was not one of them. "We need to report this," So Young said. Hyun-sik nodded and opened a communication channel to Sector Command. The screen flickered, then showed the stern face of Fleet Admiral Tae-jin. The Admiral's red uniform was perfectly pressed, his gray hair cut short in military style. "What is it, Lieutenant Commander?" Tae-jin asked. His voice carried the authority of someone who had spent 30 years conquering worlds for the Empire. "Sir, we have an unknown contact at Grid 77 Alpha. Single vessel, unidentified configuration. It's been holding position for 47 days. Admiral Tae-jin's expression didn't change. 47 days? Why am I just hearing about this now? "Sir, our computers kept classifying it as debris. It shows almost no energy signature. We only noticed it because of its perfect positioning. Send me the data." Hyun-sik transmitted their scanner readings. Admiral Tae-jin studied them for a few minutes, his face showing slight concern. "Probably a derelict from some unknown civilization," the Admiral said finally. "Space is full of dead ships from races that couldn't defend themselves against the Empire. Continue monitoring and report any changes." The communication ended. Hyun-sik and So Young looked at the screen showing the mysterious object. He didn't seem very worried, So Young said. "Should we be worried?" Hyun-sik asked. Before So Young could answer, their proximity alarms started beeping. Both of them spun to look at the scanner displays. The unknown object was moving. It just changed position, Hyun-sik said, his voice tight with sudden fear. 5 degrees to starboard. Perfect course correction. "Dead ships don't make course corrections," So Young whispered. They watched the screen in silence. For 47 days, the object had sat perfectly still. Now it was moving with purpose, adjusting its position with mathematical precision. Whatever it was very much alive. Far away on the mysterious ship, Captain Minho opened his eyes. The stasis chamber hissed as it released him back to consciousness. His body felt stiff from months of artificial sleep, but his mind was sharp and clear. He sat up slowly, his bare feet touching the warm floor of the chamber. Around him, other stasis pods began to hum as they prepared to wake his crew. The ship's computer had detected the Corvin scanning attempts and decided it was time to begin the mission. Minho walked to a wall panel and pressed his hand against it. The ship's systems responded to his touch, bringing him up to date on everything that had happened while he slept. The Corvan Empire continued its brutal expansion. 3 more civilizations had been wiped out in the past month. Billions of innocent people had died while he lay in stasis. The anger that filled him was cold and controlled. He had seen the records of what the Corvans did to peaceful species. The images of burning cities and murdered families were burned into his memory. That was why he was here. His ship, the Harmony's Edge, was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Built by Earth's best scientists and engineers, it used technology that the Corvans could not even imagine. It could exist in multiple dimensions at once, appearing and disappearing like a ghost. Its weapons could destroy matter at the atomic level. The Corvans thought they were the strongest force in the galaxy. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Other crew members began waking up around the ship. Chief Engineer Sang-Ho stretched his arms and checked his equipment. Navigation Officer Ha-Un studied star charts and planned their approach to Corva Prime. Weapons Officer Bo-Ram ran diagnostics on their special cannon. They all knew their mission. They had trained for years to carry it out. The Corvan Empire had grown fat and lazy from easy victories against defenseless worlds. They had never faced an enemy that could strike back with real force. Min-Ho walked to the bridge and sat in his captain's chair. Through the transparent walls of the ship, he could see the stars. Somewhere among them was Earth, his home world. Somewhere else was Corva Prime, the heart of an empire built on murder and conquest. "Sir," Communications Officer Yu Jin reported, "the Corvan monitoring station has detected our movement. They're trying to get more detailed scans." "Let them try," Min-Ho said calmly. "They won't learn anything useful." The Harmony's Edge was designed to be invisible to conventional sensors. The Corvans could see that something was there, but they couldn't understand what they were looking at. To them, it would just be another mystery in the vast darkness of space. But mysteries had a way of becoming nightmares. Min-Ho looked at the tactical display showing Corvan fleet positions throughout their territory. Hundreds of ships, thousands of planets, millions of soldiers, all of them believing they were safe behind their walls of steel and fire. None of them knew that their empire was about to end. "Set course for Corva Prime," Min-Ho ordered. "It's time to deliver justice." 3 months earlier, the sky above Theros had been clear and blue. Children played in parks while their parents worked in gleaming cities. The Delaney people had built a peaceful civilization over thousands of years. They had no armies, no weapons of war. They believed that violence was a disease that intelligent beings could cure with wisdom and kindness. They were wrong. Admiral Kwang Su stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Blood of Victory, and watched his fleet take positions around the planet. 47 warships hung in space like deadly flowers, their weapons pointed down at the helpless world below. "Sir," his weapons officer reported, "all ships are in position. We have target locks on every major city." Kwang Su nodded. He had done this many times before. The Corvan Empire had a simple way of dealing with new civilizations. First, they demanded immediate surrender. If the aliens agreed, they became slaves. If they refused, they died. The Delaney had refused. "Begin the bombardment," Kwang Su ordered. The first energy beams struck the capital city of New Harmony. Buildings that had stood for centuries vanished in flashes of white light. The Delaney below had no time to scream, no time to run. In seconds, millions of them were turned to ash and vapor. More beams fell across the planet. Cities disappeared one by one. Farms burned. Forests turned to glass. The Delaney tried to evacuate, but there was nowhere to run. The Corvan fleet was thorough and efficient. Within 6 hours, Theros was dead. 3 billion peaceful beings had been murdered from orbit. Admiral Kwang Su recorded his report for the Empire. Pacification of Theros complete. No survivors detected. Planet ready for colonization. But he was wrong about the survivors. A single Delaney ship had escaped during the first minutes of the attack. It was an old cargo vessel called the Star Wanderer, carrying only 50 refugees. They had watched in horror as their world died behind them, then fled into deep space to warn anyone who would listen. Captain Tae-sung of the Star Wanderer had managed to record everything. His ship's cameras captured the moment when the Corvin fleet arrived. They showed the brief communication where the Delaney leaders begged for mercy. They recorded every beam that fell, every city that burned, every life that ended. The refugees flew their damaged ship across the galaxy, desperately seeking help. Most civilizations were too afraid of the Corvin Empire to listen, but finally, after months of searching, they found someone who cared. On Earth, Dr. Yoonji sat in her laboratory studying the transmission from the Star Wanderer. She was the head of the Xenological Institute, Earth's center for learning about alien life. Her job was to understand other species and help humanity decide how to interact with them. What she saw in the Delaney recordings made her sick. The images were worse than any nightmare. Entire cities full of innocent people vanishing in seconds. Families trying to protect their children as death fell from the sky. A peaceful civilization wiped out for no reason except that they existed. "How many?" she whispered to her assistant. 3 billion confirmed dead, came the reply. The Delaney estimate that less than 1,000 of their people escaped the planet. Dr. Yoonji closed her eyes and tried to control her anger. She had studied many alien civilizations. But the Delaney were special. They had achieved something that most species never managed: true peace. For over 2,000 years there had been no wars on Theros. No armies, no weapons, no violence. They had built a paradise, and the Corvins had destroyed it in an afternoon. She opened her computer and began typing her report. President Do-hyun needed to see this immediately. The United Earth Federation had been watching the Corvin Empire for years, trying to decide if they were a threat to humanity. This recording answered that question. 2 hours later, Dr. Yoonji stood before the emergency session of Earth's leadership. President Do-hyun sat at the head of the table, his face grim. Around him were the most powerful people on Earth: generals, scientists, diplomats, and intelligence chiefs. "Show them," the president said. Dr. Yoonji activated the holographic display. The room filled with images from Theros, the peaceful cities, the happy families, the beautiful world. Then came the Corvin fleet, and everything changed. The leaders watched in silence as civilization burned. When the recording ended, the room was quiet for a long time. "How many other worlds?" asked Secretary of Diplomacy Hae-jin. Her voice was barely a whisper. 14 confirmed genocides in the past 5 years, Dr. Yoonji replied. "We estimate over 50 billion deaths. Entire species have been wiped out completely." Military Commander Jae-sung slammed his fist on the table. "We have to stop them. We can't just sit here and watch while they murder innocent people." "And do what?" Hae-jin shot back. "Start a war that could destroy Earth? The Corvin Empire has thousands of ships. They control 17 star systems. We have one world and a small defense fleet." "We have advantages they don't know about," Jae-sung argued. "Our technology is different from anything they've seen. We could hurt them. Could we win?" President Do-hyun asked quietly. The room fell silent again. Everyone knew the answer. In a straight fight, Earth would lose. The Corvin Empire was simply too big and too powerful. But Dr. Yoonji had been studying more than just the recordings from Theros. She had analyzed years of intelligence about Corvin society and military structure. "We don't need to win a war," she said. "We need to change the game." All eyes turned to her. She activated a new display showing the structure of the Corvin Empire. "The Corvins are bullies," she explained. "They only attack species that can't fight back. They've never faced a real challenge. Their military is designed for massacre, not warfare. Their ships are built to terrorize civilians, not fight other warships." "What are you suggesting?" the president asked. "Surgical strikes. Not an invasion, but precise elimination of their military leadership. Make them afraid instead of making them angry. Show them that there are consequences for genocide." Commander Jae-sung leaned forward. "What would we need?" "One ship, one crew, the right technology." Dr. Yoonji looked around the room. "We've been developing quantum stealth systems for years. A ship that can exist in multiple dimensions at once, invisible to conventional sensors. Armed with weapons that can destroy matter at the atomic level. The Harmony Project," the president said. "I thought that was just theoretical research." "The prototype is ready," Jae Sung confirmed. "We've been testing it in secret. It works." Hae Jin shook her head. "This is madness. You're talking about starting a fight with the most powerful empire in the galaxy." "No," Dr. Eunji corrected. "I'm talking about ending one." The debate continued for hours. Some argued for caution, others for immediate action. But as they talked, more reports came in. Another peaceful world had fallen to the Corvan fleet. Another billion innocent people were dead. Finally, President Do Hyun called for a vote. It was close, but the decision was made. Operation Silent Thunder was approved. Within days, Captain Min Ho received his orders. He was Earth's most experienced stealth commander, a man who had spent years learning to fight enemies that outnumbered him. His ship, the Harmony's Edge, was humanity's most advanced weapon. Admiral Wu Jin briefed him personally. "Your mission is simple," the Admiral said. "Infiltrate Corvan space, study their defenses. When you're ready, eliminate their command structure. Show them that genocide has consequences." Min Ho studied the tactical data. The Corvan Empire looked impossibly strong on paper. Hundreds of worlds, thousands of ships, millions of soldiers. But Dr. Eunji's analysis had found their weakness. They had never faced an enemy that could strike back. "No warnings?" Min Ho asked. "None," Admiral Wu Jin replied. "They gave no warnings to the Delaney. They showed no mercy to the Zephyrians. They offered no quarter to the Celestial Republic. Why should they receive what they never gave?" Min Ho nodded. He thought about the recordings from Theros, about the families that had died for no reason except existing. The Corvans had made their choice when they decided that might made right. Now they would learn that they were not the mightiest force in the galaxy. The Harmony's Edge launched in secret, slipping away from Earth like a ghost. Its destination was the heart of the Corvan Empire, where Emperor Vextar ruled from his golden throne, believing himself safe behind walls of steel and fire. He was about to discover how wrong he was. Conquest Day was the biggest celebration in the Corvan Empire. Once a year, citizens across 17 star systems gathered to honor their military victories. Parades filled the streets. Ships performed aerial displays. Emperor Vextar gave speeches about the glory of their expanding empire. This year's celebration was the largest ever. The empire had just finished conquering 3 more civilizations. Billions of new slaves would soon be working in Corvan mines and factories. The Emperor's power had never been greater. On Corva Prime, the capital world, millions of citizens packed the streets around the Imperial Palace. They cheered as military units marched past in perfect formation. Soldiers wore their finest uniforms, decorated with medals for successful genocides. The crowd loved them. Above the planet, the Imperial fleet conducted its traditional Conquest Day maneuvers. 847 warships moved in complex patterns, showing off their power. To the people below, at the center of the formation was the pride of the fleet, the Imperial Dominion. The Dominion was the largest warship ever built by the Corvan Empire. It was 5 kilometers long and carried enough firepower to destroy an entire planet. Emperor Vextar had ordered its construction after the conquest of the Delani homeworld. He wanted a ship that would make other species surrender just by seeing it. Admiral Tae Jin commanded the fleet from the bridge of the Dominion. He stood before massive windows that looked out over the capital city below. From this height, the millions of celebrating citizens looked like tiny insects. That was how he preferred to think of them. Small creatures that existed only to serve the Empire. "Beautiful sight," said his aide, Commander Moltar. "Nothing shows our power like Conquest Day." Admiral Tae Jin nodded. 800 ships under my command. No force in the galaxy can challenge us." He was wrong. 20,000 kilometers away, invisible to all their sensors, the Harmony's Edge drifted in quantum flux. To Corvan instruments, it was nothing more than background radiation. To Captain Min Ho and his crew, it was the perfect position to strike. "All stations report ready," said Chief Engineer Sang Ho. His instruments showed the ship's quantum systems operating perfectly. The Harmony's Edge existed in multiple dimensions, at once, allowing it to appear and disappear at will. Navigation Officer Ha Yun studied the tactical display. "Corvan fleet is in ceremonial formation. Shields are down for the display. They're completely vulnerable." Captain Min Ho sat in his command chair. watching the enemy ships through the transparent walls of his bridge. The Corvan fleet was impressive, but he had seen what they used that power for. The recordings from Theros still played in his mind. Innocent families burning while these same ships watched from orbit. "Target the flagship," he ordered. Weapons Officer Boram activated the Cascade Cannon. It was humanity's most advanced weapon, built using quantum physics that the Corvans had never imagined. Instead of simply destroying matter, it made matter forget how to exist. "Cascade Cannon charged and ready," Boram reported. "One shot will be enough." Minho thought about the Delaney children who had died for no reason. He thought about all the peaceful civilizations that these ships had murdered. He thought about the Emperor sitting in his palace below, celebrating genocide. "Fire," he said quietly. The Cascade Cannon released its quantum projectile. To outside observers, nothing seemed to happen. There was no flash of light, no explosion, no visible beam. The weapon existed in multiple dimensions, traveling paths that normal physics couldn't describe. On the bridge of the Imperial Dominion, Admiral Taejin was explaining fleet maneuvers to visiting dignitaries when his ship began to die. It started with the hull plating. The molecular bonds that held the metal together simply stopped working. Atoms forgot how to connect to each other. The outer armor of the great ship began to drift apart like dust in space. "Sir," his sensor officer called out in panic, "we're reading massive structural failure. Hull integrity is collapsing." "That's impossible," Admiral Taejin snapped. "We're not under attack. There are no enemy ships within 1,000 light years." But the collapse was spreading. The quantum cascade effect moved through the Dominion like a disease, breaking down matter at the atomic level. Bulkheads vanished, equipment dissolved. Entire sections of the ship simply stopped existing. The crew tried to evacuate, but there was nowhere to go. Escape pods fell apart before they could launch. Shuttle bays disintegrated around their ships. In 30 seconds, the mightiest warship in Corvan history became a cloud of scattered atoms. 800,000 crew members died without understanding what had killed them. The rest of the Corvan fleet watched in horror as their flagship ceased to exist. Fleet communications erupted in panic as commanders tried to understand what they were seeing. "Unknown weapon impact on the Dominion," one captain reported. "No, wait. There was no impact. The ship is just gone." All ships, evasive maneuvers, Admiral Taejin's second-in-command ordered from another vessel. "Activate shields. Prepare." For his transmission ended as the Cascade Cannon fired again. The heavy cruiser, Blade of Conquest, suffered the same fate as the Dominion. Its matter became unstable and drifted apart in seconds. Captain Minho watched the enemy fleet scatter, in confusion. They were trying to fight something they couldn't see or understand. It was like watching children swing at shadows. "Next target," he ordered calmly. Boram adjusted her aim. The Cascade Cannon fired again, and another Corvan ship vanished from existence. Then another, and another. Communications Officer Eugene monitored enemy transmissions. The Corvan commanders were screaming at each other in terror and confusion. They couldn't locate the source of the attacks. Their sensors showed nothing but empty space. "They're begging for help," Eugene reported. "Some captains are trying to retreat, but they don't know which direction to run." "Let them run," Minho said. "They can spread the word about what happens to genocidal empires." The Harmony's Edge continued its work with methodical precision. Every few minutes, another Corvan warship would simply cease to exist. The quantum cascade turned matter into nothingness, leaving only empty space where great ships had been. Some Corvan captains tried to return fire, shooting wildly into space. Their energy beams passed harmlessly through the area where they thought the enemy might be. The Harmony's Edge existed partially outside their dimension, untouchable by conventional weapons. Others tried to ram whatever was attacking them, pointing their ships toward the last known position of the invisible enemy. They found nothing but vacuum and died as their vessels dissolved around them. Down on Corva Prime, the Conquest Day celebration turned into panic. Citizens looked up at the sky and watched their mighty fleet disappear, ship by ship. The proud formations broke apart as surviving vessels fled in all directions. Emperor Vextar stood on his palace balcony, staring at the chaos above. His face was white with shock and growing fear. In 1 hour, his invincible navy had been reduced to scattered survivors. "Who is doing this?" he demanded of his advisors. "What force could destroy our ships without showing themselves?" No one had answers. The Empire's best scientists had never imagined weapons that could attack from other dimensions. Their military doctrine was based on overwhelming firepower and intimidation. They had no defense against an enemy they couldn't see or touch. Admiral Tae-jin's replacement, Admiral Jong-soo, tried to coordinate a response from his command ship. "All vessels, form defensive groups, maintain sensor sweeps. Whatever is attacking us must be visible somehow." But it wasn't. The Harmony's edge moved through the battlefield like a ghost, appearing just long enough to fire, then fading back into quantum flux. The Corvan sensors could no more track it than they could grab hold of starlight. One by one, the great ships of the Empire died. The carrier Storm's Eye, which had launched fighters to bomb civilian targets across a dozen worlds. The battleship Iron Fist, which had personally destroyed the Zephyrian capital. The dreadnought Death's Head, which had led the assault on the Celestial Republic. Each ship that vanished had been responsible for the deaths of billions. Captain Min-ho felt no mercy as he watched them die. They had chosen to be weapons of genocide. Now they were paying the price. "Sir," Navigation Officer Ha-un reported, "enemy fleet strength is down to 400 ships. Most of the survivors are retreating to outer system positions." "Let them go," Min-ho ordered. "We're not here to destroy their entire navy. We're here to send a message." The message was clear. The Corvan Empire, which had seemed unstoppable for 1,000 years, could be challenged. Their mighty ships could be destroyed. Their commanders could be humbled. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, there was a force that would make them pay for their crimes. The celebration on Corva Prime had turned into a riot of fear. Citizens fled through the streets as news of the fleet's destruction spread. The Empire's propaganda had always taught them that their military was invincible. Now they watched that lie crumble before their eyes. Emperor Vextar retreated to his palace bunker, surrounded by his remaining guards. For the first time in his reign, he felt afraid. Someone out there had power greater than his own, and they were using it against his empire. Above the planet, the survivors of the once mighty Imperial fleet limped away into deep space, carrying word of their defeat to every corner of the... 4 hours after the first ship died, Emperor Vextar's mighty fleet was gone. 847 warships had been reduced to empty space and scattered atoms. The survivors who managed to escape carried nothing but terror and confusion. In his palace bunker deep beneath Corva Prime, Emperor Vextar stared at the communication screen with shaking hands. For 1,000 years, his family had ruled the galaxy's most powerful empire. They had conquered civilizations, enslaved entire species, and destroyed anyone who opposed them. Now, for the first time in his life, he was afraid. "Send a transmission. On all frequencies," he ordered his communications officer. "Emergency priority. I need to speak to whoever is attacking us." The officer's hands trembled as he activated the equipment. "Channel open, Your Majesty." Vextar looked into the camera, trying to project the authority he had always possessed, but his voice shook as he spoke. "Unknown forces, this is Emperor Vextar of the Corvan Empire. We offer immediate ceasefire negotiations. We are willing to discuss terms of surrender. Please respond." The words felt like poison in his mouth. A Corvan emperor had never surrendered to anyone. But watching his entire fleet disappear in a few hours had broken something inside him. The response came quickly, but not from the direction he expected. The voice was calm, cold, and spoke in perfect Corvan. "You showed no mercy to the Delani. You offered no quarter to the Zephyrians. You gave no warning to the Celestial Republic. Why should you receive what you never gave?" Vextar's blood turned to ice. Those were the names of civilizations his forces had destroyed years ago. How could these attackers know about operations that had been classified at the highest levels? "Who are you?" he whispered into the communicator. "What do you want?" The answer came in the form of action, not words. Above Corva Prime, the massive orbital defense platforms that protected the capital began to die. These stations were each the size of small moons, armed with enough firepower to destroy entire fleets. They had guarded the Empire's heart world for 500 years. Platform 7 was the first to go. The quantum cascade effect spread through, its structure like invisible fire, breaking down matter at the atomic level. The station's million-person crew had no time to escape as their fortress simply ceased to exist. Platform 12 followed minutes later. Then, Platform 3. One by one, the mighty fortifications that had made Corva Prime untouchable began to vanish from existence. In the planet's military command center, General Dae-Sung watched his defenses disappear with growing panic. "Sir, we're losing all orbital platforms. Whatever weapon they're using, our shields can't stop it." "Deploy the ground-based defense grid," Vextar ordered desperately. "Activate every missile battery, every laser cannon. They have to be somewhere. We can hit them." But it was useless. The planet's surface weapons fired blindly into space, their energy beams and missiles hitting nothing but vacuum. The Harmony's edge existed partially outside their dimension, untouchable by conventional weapons. Captain Minho watched the desperate attacks from his bridge. The Corvins were shooting at shadows, wasting their ammunition on empty space. It would have been amusing if not for the billions of innocent people they had murdered. "Sir," Communications Officer Eugene reported, "we're receiving transmissions from Corvin military bases across their territory. They're all requesting orders." "Show me," Minho said. The tactical display lit up with markers representing Corvin military installations throughout their 17-star empire. Hundreds of bases, shipyards, training facilities, and command centers, all of them filled with the people who had carried out genocide for sport. Navigation Officer Ha-eun plotted quantum jump coordinates. "We can hit the major installations in sequence. Command bases first, then shipyards, then training facilities." "Do it," Minho ordered, "but avoid civilian targets. We're not here to become monsters like them." The Harmony's edge vanished from Corva Prime's orbit and reappeared near Corvin Military Command Base Alpha in the Nexus system. The base was a massive complex built into an asteroid, housing the Empire's Strategic Planning Division. The officers inside were analyzing reports from the capital, trying to understand how their fleet had been destroyed. General Wu Sung stood before a holographic display showing the aftermath of the battle. "Impossible," he muttered. 800 ships don't just disappear. There has to be an explanation. He found his explanation when the cascade cannon fired. The quantum projectile passed through the asteroid's shields as if they didn't exist, then began breaking down matter at the molecular level. The entire base and its 50,000 personnel vanished in seconds. The Harmony's edge jumped again, appearing at Corvin Shipyard 7 in the Outer Rim. This facility built the Empire's largest warships, including vessels designed specifically for orbital bombardment of civilian targets. The workers inside were constructing 3 new planet killers when their facility simply stopped existing. Jump after jump, base after base, the systematic destruction continued. Each target was chosen carefully. Only military installations that directly supported the Empire's genocidal campaigns. The quantum weapon was precise enough to destroy a single building while leaving nearby civilian structures untouched. At the Imperial Naval Academy on Corva's third moon, Cadet Jin Ho was studying historical battles when his classroom began to dissolve around him. He had just enough time to see his textbooks crumble to dust before he joined them. The Strategic Weapons Research Center on Forge World was developing new ways to exterminate civilian populations when the Cascade Cannon found it. 500 of the Empire's best military scientists learned what it felt like to be unmade at the atomic level. News of each destruction spread quickly through Corvin communication networks. Military commanders across the Empire watched helplessly as their forces were systematically eliminated by an enemy they couldn't see or fight. On the bridge of the Harmony's edge, tactical analyst Ji Ho presented casualty reports to Captain Min Ho. "Sir, we've eliminated 67 major military installations in the past 6 hours. Estimated casualties are in the millions, but all confirmed military personnel." "No civilian casualties?" Min Ho asked. "None detected, sir. Our weapons are precise enough to avoid collateral damage." Min Ho nodded grimly. That precision was important. They weren't here to become the same kind of monsters they were fighting. Every person who died today had chosen to serve an empire built on genocide. The quantum jumps continued. Corvan Military Intelligence Headquarters on Shadow Prime, gone. The Imperial War College on Victory Station, dissolved. The Special Operations Command on Dark Moon, erased from existence. Each facility that vanished had played a role in planning or executing the murder of innocent civilizations. The Empire's capacity for conquest was being surgically removed, piece by piece. Admiral Jong-Su, one of the few Corvan fleet commanders to survive the battle at Corva Prime, tried desperately to coordinate a defense from his damaged cruiser. All remaining ships converge on Sector 7. We'll make our stand there. But there was nothing to make a stand against. The Harmony's edge appeared wherever it wanted, struck without warning, then vanished before anyone could respond. It was like trying to fight the wind. In his bunker, Emperor Vextar received reports of each new destruction. His empire's military might was melting away like snow in sunlight. Within hours, the force that had conquered 17 star systems would cease to exist. "Your Majesty," his aide whispered, "perhaps we should consider evacuation." "To where?" Vextar snapped. "They're destroying everything. There's nowhere left to run." He was right. The invisible enemy seemed to know the location of every Corvan military base, every secret facility, every hidden command post. Decades of careful construction were being undone in a single day. The Omega Research Station, where Corvan scientists had developed new plague weapons for exterminating resistant populations, vanished without trace. The Black Site Prison, where captured enemy leaders were tortured for information, simply stopped existing. The recruitment center on Homeworld, where young Corvans were trained to see other species as inferior, crumbled to quantum dust. By the end of the day, the Corvan Empire's military apparatus had been completely destroyed. Not a single major base remained operational. The shipyards that built their fleets were gone. The academies that trained their officers were empty space. The research facilities that developed their weapons had been erased from reality. Yet through it all, not one civilian had been harmed. The mysterious attackers had shown a precision that the Corvans themselves had never possessed. Where the Empire had used sledgehammers, their enemies used scalpels. As reports of the final destructions reached Corva Prime, Emperor Vexitar finally understood the true message being sent. This wasn't random destruction or conquest. This was justice. For every world the Corvans had burned, their military bases were being destroyed. For every innocent life they had taken, their instruments of war were being erased. The reckoning was complete and perfect. The mighty Corvan Empire, which had ruled through fear and murder for 1,000 years, no longer possessed the ability to threaten anyone. Their fleets were gone, their bases were destroyed, and their weapons were scattered atoms in space. 3 months later, the galaxy was a different place. The 17 star systems that had once trembled before Corvan fleets now flew flags of independence. Worlds that had been slave colonies became free nations. Species that had hidden in fear began to emerge from the shadows. On Corva Prime, former Emperor Vextar sat in what had once been his throne room. The golden chair was still there, but the man who occupied it was no longer an emperor. Without ships to enforce his will or armies to conquer new worlds, he was just another powerless civilian on a planet full of confused people. The great palace that had symbolized Corvan power was falling apart. With no military budget to maintain it, sections were being sold off to pay for basic services. The throne room itself would soon become a museum, a reminder of how quickly empires could fall. Former Admiral Kwang Su stood at a communication console, broadcasting on all frequencies as he had done every day for the past month. His uniform was wrinkled and stained, his eyes hollow with desperation. "Unknown forces," he spoke into the transmitter. "This is former Admiral Kwang Su of the disbanded Corvan fleet. Please respond. We need to know who you are. We need to understand what you want from us." His voice echoed across the galaxy, but, as always, there was no response. The mysterious enemy who had destroyed his empire remained silent and invisible. "We've surrendered completely," Kwang Su continued, his voice breaking. "We've disbanded our military. We've freed all our slaves. We've offered reparations to every species we wronged. What more do you want? Why won't you show yourselves?" The answer came not from the invisible guardians, but from the very people the Corvins had tried to destroy. Captain Tae-sung of the Delani refugee ship Star Wanderer received the transmission and smiled grimly. He was orbiting Theros, the homeworld. The Corvins had burned 3 months before the Empire fell. Now it was being rebuilt by Delaney survivors who had emerged from hidden colonies throughout the galaxy. Because they don't need to show themselves, he said to his crew. Justice doesn't require recognition. The Delaney were not the only ones returning. Across the galaxy, species that had been thought extinct began to reveal themselves. The Zephyrians emerged from the gas giant clouds where they had hidden their cities. The Celestial Republic survivors came out of the deep space stations where they had preserved their culture. On the former slave world of Drakmor, the native Draxi people were rebuilding their ancient cities. Elder Kiltar walked through streets that had been filled with Corvin overseers just months ago. Now they were alive with the sounds of his people working, laughing, living freely for the first time in generations. The shadow ships kept their promise, he told his granddaughter. They said the oppressors would fall, and they did. But who were they, grandfather? The young Draxi asked. Where did they come from? Kiltar looked up at the stars. Does it matter? Some questions are more important than answers. The real question is, what do we do with the freedom they gave us? That question was being answered across the galaxy. The power vacuum left by the Corvin Empire's collapse was not being filled by another conquering force. Instead, former slave worlds were forming peaceful alliances. Trade agreements replaced tribute demands. Cooperation replaced conquest. Dr. Yoonji sat in her laboratory on Earth, monitoring galactic communications with satisfaction. Her computer screen showed reports from dozens of worlds, peace treaties being signed, refugee camps being converted to settlements, weapon factories being turned into schools and hospitals. The psychological analysis was correct, she told her assistant. Remove the source of fear, and cooperation becomes natural. Her assistant, Dr. Young Soo, studied the data. The former Corvin worlds are struggling, though. Without their military economy, they don't know how to function. That's not our problem to solve, Dr. Yoonji replied. They chose to build their society on conquest and slavery. Now they have to learn to build something better. Some former Corvin worlds were indeed struggling. Without tribute from conquered species, their economies collapsed. Citizens who had grown rich from the labor of slaves found themselves working for the first time in their lives. It was a hard adjustment, but a necessary one. On Corva Prime, former General Dae-sung now worked in a food distribution center, helping to feed refugees from the wars his people had started. It was humble work, but honest work. For the first time in his adult life, he was creating something instead of destroying it. Do you think they're still watching us? Asked his co-worker, a former weapons engineer named Il-sung. Dae-sung looked up at the sky. I hope so. I hope they know we're trying to change. High above the planet, invisible in quantum flux, the Harmony's edge did indeed watch. Captain Minho stood on his bridge, observing the slow transformation of the former capital world. The process was messy and difficult, but it was happening. Sir, Communications Officer Yu Jin reported, we're receiving messages from 47 different species requesting contact with Earth. They want to thank humanity for stopping the Corvin Empire. Deny all requests, Minho ordered. Our mission was never about recognition. His crew understood. The moment Earth revealed itself as the force that destroyed the Corvin Empire, humanity would become a target. Other species would either worship them as saviors or fear them as the new threat. Neither outcome would lead to the peace they had fought to create. Chief Engineer Sang-ho monitored the ship's quantum systems. Sir, we could maintain this position indefinitely. The stealth systems are operating perfectly. Navigation Officer Ha-un studied star charts and fleet movements. No signs of new military buildups anywhere in the galaxy. The former Corvan worlds are focusing on rebuilding their civilian infrastructure. That was the key difference. When the Corvin Empire had fallen, no one had tried to replace it with another empire. The galaxy had learned that cooperation was more profitable than conquest. Weapons Officer Boram kept the Cascade cannon ready, but unused. Sir, should we reveal ourselves to prevent future conflicts? Show other species what happens to conquerors? Minho considered the question. It was tempting to announce their presence, to serve as a visible deterrent against future tyrants. But Dr. Yunji's psychological profiles suggested that would be a mistake. Fear of visible force just creates arms races, he said. Fear of invisible justice creates conscience. The crew of the Harmony's Edge had become the galaxy's conscience, watching from the shadows to ensure that the peace they had created would endure. They saw everything: trade negotiations between former enemies, scientific cooperation between species that had once been at war, cultural exchanges that enriched all participants. Chief Medical Officer Yeon Soo maintained the crew's health during their long vigil. The quantum stasis systems kept them young and alert, ready to act if another threat emerged. But for now, the galaxy was healing. On the observation deck, Minho watched distant stars and reflected on their mission. They had come as avengers for the voiceless and had ended up as guardians of the peace. The Corvan Empire had fallen not because humanity was stronger, but because humanity understood something the Corvans never had. Power without justice was just another form of madness. The galaxy had learned that lesson, written in the quantum ashes of 800 destroyed warships. Every species now knew that somewhere in the darkness between stars, there was a force that would hold tyrants accountable. They didn't know where it came from or what it wanted. They only knew that it existed, and that was enough. Trade ships flew safely between worlds without fear of pirates or conquest fleets. Peaceful species explored new systems without worrying about encountering genocidal empires. Children played on worlds that had once been battlefields. The universe was vast, but it was no longer empty of hope. Former Admiral Kwang Soo continued his daily broadcasts, pleading for contact with the mysterious force that had humbled his empire. He would never receive an answer because he was asking the wrong question. He wanted to know who had destroyed the Corvan Empire, but the real question was why it had needed to be destroyed at all. The Harmony's Edge drifted silently through space, its quantum engines ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. Captain Minho and his crew watched over the peace they had created, invisible guardians ensuring that the galaxy's children could grow up in a universe where justice existed. Though Corvan Empire was gone, but its lesson lived on. Across 17 star systems and beyond, species that had once lived in fear now built futures based on cooperation and mutual respect. And in the depths of space, humanity's most advanced ship maintained its eternal vigil, ready to remind anyone who forgot that power without conscience would always face a reckoning. The age of empires was over. The age of justice had begun. No one knew what that ship was, but everyone knew what it represented. The promise that the innocent would always have a protector, even if they never saw its face. The darkness between the stars was no longer empty. It was full of hope, watched over by silent guardians who asked for nothing in return except that the galaxy remember the difference between strength and tyranny, and in that difference, peace had found its foundation.